Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace, returning creator, someone who was here before to talk about her Kickstarter campaign, a book that eventually came out from Image called Deadliest Bouquet. It's my pleasure to welcome Erica Schultz back to the show. Erica, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, really excited to talk to you about your upcoming series. It's set in Todd McFarlane's Spawn universe. It's called Rat City. Zay Carlos is your collaborator on the series, brilliant artist. So why don't you start by letting our listeners know what it's about? What's the elevator pitch for Rat City?
I really am kind of terrible at these, logline elevator pitches, but I'll say that Rat City is it's basically takes place in 2111. So we're in the far future, about 90 years into the future. And it is about a young man, ex-soldier, who becomes a spawn, but he is not dead like Al Simmons. And basically, when Al detonated the God bomb or the necroplasmic detonation, I always call it the God bomb because it's a lot easier. When Al detonated the God bomb in 300 and 301, the reverberations of that went throughout space and time. So simultaneously as that is going on and this huge energy wave is going across the space-time continuum, it starts to affect things in the future, in the past, and yeah, things get a little hairy after that.
Yeah, it's so interesting to have you telling the story, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of, leaping forward, obviously we've seen a lot of different hell spawns and different a lot of it in the past, medieval spawn and what have you. And we know there's been hell
Gunslinger.
spawns. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we know
I
that
mean,
there's
even Cagliostro.
yeah, yeah, exactly. One of the earliest
Yeah.
and the mystery of who he was and eventually revealed. Was it always something? I mean, obviously you're familiar with Spawn. Was it always something that kind of in the back of your mind, like, well, what if we go into the future? What if we see what about these future hell spawns?
Well, when I was first approached by Thomas Healy, who's the editor-in-chief for Todd McFarlane Presents, he had asked me if I wanted to do something for Spawn. And we didn't know whether I would be, doing a mini with Scorch or with She Spawn or whatever. So when I finally, because we had met at New York Comic Con and, those conventions are always so frenetic. So when
Hmm.
we sat down and we actually had like a conversation, I just sort of pitched this idea of this veteran in the future. And, it has some things that harken back to Al and who Al was. Al was a Marine and he worked for the government and everything and then was murdered on the job. Sorry, spoiler alert. Um, and so I wanted there to be things that would harken back to Al, but also things um, that would be basically that would be able to tell a new story. So I know that I said this during the Deadliest Bouquet, but everything that I write has to have a bit of me in it, has to be emotionally autobiographical, as I always say. Um, and my dad was a Vietnam veteran. My grandfather was a veteran of World War II. My grandfather was also an amputee. So I wanted to sort of look at the plight of veterans and what happens and how they're treated after they come back from war. I mean, when my grandfather came back from World War II, he literally got a parade, but when my father came back from Vietnam, it was a very different time. So Peter Cairn, who is our lead, Peter is a soldier and he's a veteran and he is in a very unpopular war. No one wants to call it World War III, so they call it the conflict in the Caucasus. And on a mission in Azerbaijan, um, Peter loses his legs. And we see in the first issue, originally when I first started pacing everything out, I started just like in the middle of it. We see, Spawn on a rooftop at night in the rain, like your typical kind of thing. And then, Thomas said, we don't have to do that. Like we can do something different with this. It doesn't have, you don't have to mimic what Todd did. We can do something different. So I said, all right, so let's tell a slower burn and let's bring people up to speed. And for me, that's a little odd because usually I tell nonlinear stories where we like start in one place and we jump back and jump forward and everything. So sort of telling an A to B, B to C kind of story is it's not a challenge, but it is kind of interesting for me just because I'm so used to doing these nonlinear stories, even though we still have, little flashbacks here and there that give you some context. A lot of things are really just, you know, we're telling the story from the beginning and seeing Peter as a soldier, seeing the brotherhood basically that he has with his unit. Um, and one of his best friends is also injured in the same attack that Peter loses his legs. His best friend Reese also loses his hands. Um, and so we see what happens to Peter a few years later, and we see that, he, like so many people, are living in, it can't even be called poverty because everybody's there.
Hmm.
It's basically they're living in Rat City, which I think it was issue number 42, which is where Todd originally referred to the section of the Bowery that Spawn lived in with like Bobby and Bootsy and the rest of the guys. It was called Rat City, the worst part of the Bowery, and that's where the title of this book comes from. So we see that Peter is living and working in Rat City. We see these huge, beautiful, gleaming towers that, the first couple of floors are, you know, really crappy and have like graffiti and everything everywhere. But you start going up and you see these towers that are like extending into the sky, and the people who are in them have no idea what's happening on the ground because their feet never touch the ground. They take air taxis from one spot to the next. Like they don't have to mingle with the, derelict denizens of the day kind of thing. And, Peter is part of the masses, and he's working a job that is, sort of tenuous. He doesn't have, they don't have health care. They don't have all the things that, when you think of like, oh, Star Trek in the future, everything's wonderful. No, this is not that kind of future. This is very Blade Runner, cyberpunk, um, you know, very sort of gritty and almost the worst of us, for lack of a better term. If you read the book that I wrote with Van Jensen and Anike called Bylines in Blood, this is one step farther from that. And I actually sent Jay, when we were working on concepts, I sent him Bylines so he could see what Anike had already started plotting out, and sort of the environments that she had drawn for that book. She had drawn and colored for that book. And I sent them to Jay and said, see how dirty this is? Let's just take it a notch farther than that, People, it's basically everyone's just in survival mode, you know? And you just live day to day and you survive, and you don't have expectations of anything more. And if you do, then you're just setting yourself up for hopelessness.
Yeah, listeners, if you missed that, Bylines and Blood is from Aftershock. It's brilliant. Van Jensen used to be a journalist, so he's got that perspective. Yeah, dystopian future and all about the, what is the truth, what obligations does journalism have, and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's definitely worth your time. But getting back to Rat City, what's so interesting to me and has me so excited. So you really are telling a new story. It's such a far leap into the future. There are still some reverberations of what Al did, and obviously Peter, is a hellspawn, but in a different way. You mentioned he's not dead, but yet there are these tie-ins, right? Like it's called Rat City. He does have powers, the powers of a hellspawn, and a lot of the things you're talking about, while not obviously to the extent, it does kind of mimic what Al was going through when he first came back, and he had nothing, and he was just trying to survive. So, is that just kind of a serendipitous coincidence? Are you're not purposely trying to tell a parallel story like you were saying earlier? You don't have to homage what Todd did, but there are similarities. It seems like.
Oh no, there's definitely similarities. I mean, um, so Peter lives in Rat City, but he lives in an apartment, and the area is called Rat City. Like, so I grew up in and around New York, so everybody knows Alphabet City.
Hmm.
Well, when Alphabet City, when they were trying to rebrand the East Village, they would say, "Oh no, it's not Alphabet City, it's the East Village." It's like, no, it's Alphabet City. Come on, like you live on Ace, like you live on Avenue A, you're living on in Alphabet City. But like that's the kind of thing. So it's almost like an opposite of branding something. It's like the opposite of like, oh, instead of calling it Rat City, let's call it something else. No, they have completely embraced the fact that Rat City in the Bowery is this place. It is your Skid Row, but it's not just one, street. It is a whole area. Um, and so, yeah, so Peter is not homeless, like Al was. Peter does have a job. Peter is alive, and Peter has he has benefits in the sense that he has these prosthetics, these cybernetic prosthetics that are incredibly advanced. And it's those prosthetics and the nanites within them that are affected that create that make Peter into the spawn. Because when the God bomb goes off and this giant energy wave is just careening through and just bulldozing through the space-time continuum, what it's literally doing is it is affecting people, whether it's through radiation, whether it's through heavenly particles, whether it's through hellspawn particles, or even Violator was part of it. Violator was there when the God bomb went off. So what is in this? It's almost kind of like when a bomb goes off, like when Fukushima had a meltdown, and there was this sort of wave of radiation coming at you, and there was this wave of toxic water that was coming on the shores of California. People are like, what is this? What is in this soup? Basically, we don't know. So there's so much that has come at everybody in the city that when the wave comes for Peter, it basically creates this horrible blackout. And everybody loses their mind for a little bit. It's almost like remember the old Captain Americas that have the mad bombs.
Right. Yep.
So everybody starts losing their mind for a little bit. And Peter is just like, what the hell is going like I know people are crazy, but people are crazy here.
Right.
And he was on the job when it happened, and he's just like, I just want to get home. Just want to get home, and that's it. And when as he's making his way, he ends up getting into an altercation. And Peter was a soldier, I mean, he's a capable person. And he gets into this fight, but it's not a normal fight. Like there's an urge inside of Peter that is very different. And he fights very, very differently to the point where he almost doesn't even recognize who he is in that moment. And it scares some people who witness this fight. What they see scares them. And so Peter basically starts finding a part of himself that he's unfamiliar with, and he sort of wrestles with the idea, well, is this just the old soldier in me coming back and things like that? Or, is there something that happened in that blackout that I didn't understand?
Right.
So there's a lot of mystery to it that we're going to slowly unfold throughout.
Yeah, kind of a journey of self-discovery. It almost sounds like Peter
Yes.
trying to figure out who he is. Which brings me to another one of my questions. So final order cutoff for this, everybody, is March 18th, and the book should be out on April 10th. So you need to let your retailers know now that you want to order it. But so far only one issue. We've seen the first issue cover, but this is planned as an ongoing. You have it plotted out for a while, working ahead and what have you.
Yeah, I have the plot. I have, well, 1 through 6 is written, 1 through 7 rather is written, and I have it plotted up until 24. And it was sort of offhand, it was sort of an offhanded comment, but I've been sort of taking it as an edict of like Todd wants at least 30 issues out of you. So I am doing my best to make it at least 30 issues, if not longer. I mean, I for all I know, this is going to go 350 issues. I don't know.
Right.
Um, but you can definitely expect 30. if not more. And we're doing it in 6-issue arcs. So the first trade that would come out would be 1 through 6. So that's completely written already, and Jay is working on the art for issue number 4 right now. And I outlined I'm working on an outline for issue 8 right now because I outlined the arcs, but then I outlined each individual issue as well.
Mhm.
So I'm working on the outline for issue number 8 now, and looking to get that get the script done before mid-March. So
What's the balance like? I mean, obviously this is set in the Spawn universe, so you do want a few touchstones, and certainly with Peter having the powers of the Hellspawn, that's one, and we talked about some other similarities. But you also mentioned, this is kind of a brand new story. You have a lot of freedom. At the same time, you're going to want fans of Spawn, people that are invested in Todd's line to pick this up. So do you worry about that at all, or you just, what, I'm going to tell the best story I can, and yeah, there are some aspects of Spawn mythology here, but I'm just going to focus on telling the story that I want to tell.
to be honest, I mean, the only person that I really need to make sure is happy about it is Todd. To be truthful. Um, so if Todd is happy with what I'm doing, then great. But no, I mean, I think that this is a jumping on point for people who may be familiar with the character of Spawn, but not the Spawn universe. So people who've never read Spawn before, they can jump on this. Fans of sci-fi can jump on this. Fans of Spawn can jump on this. Fans of stories about self-discovery can jump on this. Um, there's there's a lot mashed in here. There is a war story that is mashed in here. There's a love story that is mashed in here. There is a story about um, blaming yourself for things. There's a story about basically trying to reinvent yourself because you don't like what you see in the mirror. There's a whole lot going on here, and we're gonna, pick apart each one of these things, and we're gonna examine it, and we're gonna say these people, you know, Peter is, for want of a better term, Peter is a superhero, and how how do we lionize our soldiers, or how do we, treat them like trash? How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile being a soldier yet also having killed people? Is that does that just come with the territory? Like, there's I forget who said it, but I heard a phrase once that it's not murder if it's during war or something to that
Mhm.
effect. It's killing, not murder. And when Peter comes back, he has a very different outlook than when he first went into the service. And we're going to wrestle with that. We're going to wrestle with a whole lot of things.
Yeah, again, parallels to Spawn because that's the thing. Like, we've been doing the daily Spawn and going back and rereading from the very beginning of Spawn. And one of the things that I don't think Todd got enough credit for in the beginning was how relatable Al Simmons was. He came back for love. We can all relate to caring about somebody. You put yourself in Al's shoes. What would I do? And it seems like kind of the same thing. If you were in Peter's shoes and you were discovering that you had these abilities and questioning who you were, what would you do in that situation? I think there's a lot of relatability there, and I think it leads to an interesting story. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier about being emotionally invested for you and exploring things that matter to you. Because when a writer does that and they're passionate about something, it comes through in the writing, and then it becomes that much more enjoyable. Would you agree with that?
Oh no, definitely. And to be honest, I mean, I try very, very hard to like everything that I write. And I'm not gonna like every single thing that I write because, sometimes there are certain things there are certain boxes you have to tick off for
Right.
the crossover series or for this, that, and the next thing. But I genuinely, I don't want anybody to ever read a story that I wrote and be like, oh, she kind of phoned this one in, because I feel that I do have enough of a bibliography that people can sort of sense my style and sense, and sort of feel my voice as they're reading. So I don't want anybody to feel that. And I am genuinely invested in this story for so many reasons. Um, Least of which is the fact that, I mean, I was a fan of Spawn. I read, multiple issues of Spawn. I mean, I was in high school when Spawn first started. And I remember in college, one of my very close friends was like, would always still go to the comic shop. He'd be like, "Oh man, you got to read this." And, this is like some crazy stuff. And like, I've never read anything like this. And look at these panel layouts. And you've got double page spreads that are like, you know, verticals and all kinds of like really groundbreaking things at the time. And I always thought that Spawn was just a really fun and simple story, and not simple, and that's by no means a pejorative, but the idea of like Al came back for love.
Hmm.
And that is the core of the story. Al came back for love. Then there's all this other complication with Al, with Al's relationship with Cagliostro and, the whole thing with Raphael and trying, with the office and trying to figure things out and trying to get a hold of Spawn and Spawn breaking free and Violator just screwing around and Jason Wynn being Jason Wynn. Um, so I think that it basically just boils down to that one thing is like, here is someone who is very determined, and that determination worked really well for him in his job. But that same determination is what makes him a thorn in Hell's side, you know? And so we work on that. And then, the idea that, I mean, there are other characters at play in this story where we've got a character named Quinlan who is so there's a character named Reese who is Peter's best friend, and he's one of his comrades in arms. And Quinlan and Reese are in relationship, and Peter and Reese are like brothers. And Quinlan and Peter do not know each other, but something happens to Reese that then brings the two of them together, and they're sort of locked in this relationship because of mutual loss. And they don't trust each other, but they both trusted this one person, so they kind of have to trust each other, but they're still, and it's this sort of gentle dance of I don't want to tell you too much about myself because I don't want you to judge me,
Hmm.
but I'm still really vulnerable because I just lost someone close to me. And I don't know if I'm going to accidentally slip and then say something and then out of nowhere, you know, it's gonna blow stuff up. So there's a lot of things that are happening, but like any good Spawn story, I mean, you would see stuff that Todd would seed in like issue number like 4 or 5, and then it would blow up later. I mean, look at No Home Here, the new story by Jonathan Glapion and
Hmm.
Daniel Enriquez. Like that whole thing is about the Billy is basically bounces off of the Billy Kincaid story, which was Spawn number 5,
Yeah, way
4 or 5, and that comes out of Billy Kincaid. So, stuff that was seeded literally 30 years ago is gonna come back. So, I mean, there's stuff that I'm seeding in, issues. Actually, there's stuff that's seeded in issue 1 that I already have plotted to come back at the end of 12 and then start a new arc, 13. That's when that's really going to ramp up in 13. So I'm sort of trying to juggle a whole lot. And it's kind of like looking at a spider web and focusing on one little octagon of it and then taking 3 steps back to see how that octagon is going to incorporate into the rest of it. It's a lot of work. I'm working
Yeah,
hard.
yeah. Sounds fun though. I mean, a little bit more freedom than, a lot of the other situations where you're in where you're like, well, maybe I'm going to get 4 issues, maybe I'm going to get 6, and that might be it. How can I tell a complete story? You've got a little more room to play, it seems like.
Oh, I have a lot of room to play. And, I joked around at the beginning with Thomas saying Todd is either giving me all this room because he trusts me or he's giving me enough rope to hang myself. And he's like, no, he trusts you. He loves what you're putting out and this, that, and the next thing. So I was like, all right. But I mean, everybody has self-doubt. I mean, all creators, we all have self-doubt and this idea of like the anxiety of, am I writing something? I'm writing something that I would enjoy. Am I writing something that somebody else would enjoy? But like I said, I mean, as long as Todd likes it, that's all that matters to me.
Yeah, it's interesting
So.
that you mentioned that earlier because we had him on recently, and he was talking about just how much kind of Spawn headcanon he has, things that you would never actually see on the page, but it exists in his head, and he's kind of the only person that it exists for because he's never written it down or told anybody about it. So if you're writing a story and it's fitting in and he's enjoying it, it's fitting into his headcanon, that's really all you need to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be a little psychic when it comes to Todd. But no, I mean, Todd has never been anything but incredibly kind and supportive of the work that Jay and I are doing. And he's really always just been like, he hasn't said, I trust you to do this, but I mean, he's, him having sort of a hands-off approach, for lack of a better term, um, is him saying, I trust you to do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned Jay a couple times, your collaborator on the series doing the art. Let's talk about kind of the visual tone of the story, of Peter's look and what have you, because he looks, obviously different than other Spawns that we've seen before. Was this just a situation where you kind of laid the broad strokes out for Jay and said, hey, do the character designs, do the world designs, and then we'll bounce back and forth? Or did you have specific ideas in mind for what you wanted things to look like?
Well, I gave him a lot of reference. And, and with any script that I work on, whether it's for Marvel or for, Spawn or what, or even independent stuff, I always, tell the artists, like, these are suggestions. Like, comics are a collaborative process, and anybody who is a writer who dictates to their artist is not a true, master of the, medium. So I always say, like, this is where my head's at. um, if there's something that you disagree with, let's chat about it kind of thing. And so I was saying, like, let's think about like Blade Runner and Cyberpunk. And he was like, yeah, Altered Carbon. I'm like, yeah, we're totally on the same page with this. And so he just got it from jump. And the idea is that, the look in the Spawn outfit is it's not necroplasm that creates the Spawn outfit on Peter. It's not a necroplasmic costume. It's the infection, it's the infected nanites. So his prosthetic limbs have nanites in them, and that's how they work. And when the God bomb went off, his nanites were what got infected. So when the nanites create this look, they're emulating Spawn because that's what the God Bomb has basically infected them with, is this, for lack of a better term, this visual of what Spawn would be.
Hmm.
And Jay just took it and ran with it and just, I mean, we went through a couple of different iterations about like, well, what should the cape look like? Because if the cape isn't necroplasm, it's actually nanites. Like, what should we do with the cape? Should it be huge and billowing like, Todd's cape, excuse me, like Al's cape, or should it be, more streamlined? And he did a streamlined version of it. Like when you look at the character turnarounds, there is a streamlined version. But I love these little details, like that notch in the bottom of the cape
Hmm.
that you can see on the cover, these little details and little things like on his legs, there are these tubing on the legs that when he is Peter, the tubing glows blue, but when he is Spawn, it glows green. All these just like little details that are just really fantastic, that Jay put together. And you see a lot. One of the things that he's done, which is you're going to see more of, is there's graffiti everywhere, and it just makes it feel lived in is the wrong word, but it just makes it feel so gritty and genuine to just see this like just tags thrown up everywhere. And that's something that I think is just a really kind of cool visual of this idea of these people in general trying to make their own mark, like literally make their mark by tagging. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it gives that sense that the world is dirty, right? It's lived in, it's used, it's not the bright, shiny. You mentioned Star Trek, earlier as kind of a reference to sort of the bright, shiny future, and this sounds like it's sort of the antithesis of that.
Yeah, and the bright, shiny future does exist. It just exists 50 stories up.
Yeah, people literally living in ivory towers.
Yeah, and the rarefied air that they're among. So, hi,
Well,
puppy.
yeah, very excited, very, very excited for Rat City #1. Reminder everybody, it's supposed to be out on April 10th. You have until March 18th to order it. So now's the time to tell your retailers that you want to grab it, and they can be sure to order you a copy. So as we're winding down here, Erica, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners about Rat City or any other work you have coming out soon?
Well, yeah, I mean, we are really excited about Rat City. I also have Daredevil Gang War #4 comes out March 7th, March 6th, excuse me. And then Blood Hunters was just announced from Marvel, which is going to be a mini series in the as part of the Blood Hunt crossover, where everybody turns into a vampire kind of thing. So that's going to be announced. That was just announced today.
Well, fantastic. A lot of good stuff coming out for sure. So, again, we appreciate you joining us and telling us all about Rat City. This might be the one that I'm most excited about just because it's such a departure, just going, far into the future. He's not dead. He looks fantastic from what I've seen so far. So, I can't wait to check it out.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a Spawn book that isn't a Spawn book, but that's still a Spawn book.
yeah, exactly. And I feel like this character is in good hands, and I can't wait to see. And if Todd's digging it, then I feel like, the Spawn community out there is going to dig it as well. Uh, can you let everybody know where to find you? You mentioned a couple projects you have coming up. Uh, People want to know when those things are coming out and what have you. Where's the best place to follow your work online?
I'm on Blue Sky at Erica Schultz 42. I'm still on Twitter at Erica Schultz 42, and I am on Instagram at Erica Schultz Writes, WRITES, and my website is ericaschultzwrites.com. So if you don't go to your comic shop and get Rat City, I will have copies that I'll have up for sale on my website. Or if you want to check out any of my other previous work, whether it's my independent stuff like Deadliest Bouquet, which you were kind enough to have me on during when we had
Yeah,
the
a great. Yeah,
Kickstarter.
and that was such a great story and a surprising ending that I did not expect. So yeah, I recommend that as well as the bylines that you mentioned that you did with Van Jensen's also very good.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I've got all that stuff up there. You can read up on my stuff and yeah, just check it out. I will be at Lexington Comic-Con on March 7th. So if you are at Lexington Comic-Con, you can come by and say hi. I will be tabling next to Liana Kangas.
Oh, fantastic. And I'll put links, everybody, to the social media in the show notes. So if you're having trouble finding Eric on any of those platforms, you can just go to the show notes and click and find her there. So again, don't forget April 10th, everybody, for Rat City. Order now. Let your comic shop know. Last thing you want to do is miss out on this thing because how many of us would like to be able to go back and buy a few copies of Spawn #1 now, right? You don't want to miss out. So
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Again, Erica, thanks so much for joining. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Jace. Be well.
And to all you listeners, we want to thank you for your support as always. We appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.